For 100 taels of silver, I led 6 noble sons into the forbidden ancient battlefield. They rode Salusi and celestial steeds, looking down on everyone, until thousands of ghost soldiers charged out of the thick fog. I drew the sword that had been wrapped in cotton cloth for 10 years. When the blade's light arose, I saw the mysterious, cloaked woman. She softly spoke the name of my sword technique. Grasping a summer cicada may not mean holding the whole summer, but holding that sword means holding an entire martial world. I held the 3-foot green blade, dreaming once of becoming the sword god revered by 10,000 and being the unmatched Sword Immortal for a time, severing the pagoda of the Grandmaster, knocking off the crown of the Emperor. With a loud laugh, the 8 great kings of strings and the 4 little demons, I fought them alone and captured them with joined hands. Prologue. My name is Beiyou, born and raised in the Northwest. Xiaofang village is a third-rate village. It's barren land able to support only a small population. All the able-bodied young men in the village with any ambition refuse to scratch out a living from the soil, going out one after another to seek their fortunes. 30 households, mostly the elderly, women, and children, seemed like forgotten people, living peacefully on this barren land. When I was 6 years old, the appearance of a passing old man shattered my otherwise peaceful life. The old man had white hair and a tall stature. He always wore black clothes and carried a long wooden box wrapped in shoe brocade on his back. Behind the stockade was a cliff. Every day he sat there cross-legged, the wooden box resting across his lap, motionless. That day, I held a freshly caught summer cicada in my hand and looked at him with curiosity, as well as the wooden box on his lap. The old man smiled and, for the first time, asked me my name. I said my name was Beiyou. He patted the ground beside him, signaling me to come and sit. I sat down cross-legged, imitating his posture. The old man and the young boy sat side by side on the cliff, gazing at the scenery beyond and listening to the howling wind. My gaze remained fixed on the brocade-wrapped wooden box. After hesitating for a long time, I finally gathered the courage to ask him what was inside. He said it contained a sword. My eyes widened. In all my life, I had never seen a sword. I hesitated, reluctant to part with the summer cicada in my hand, then brought it to him and said earnestly, "I'll give you this. Will you let me see what the sword looks like?" A hint of inexplicable amusement appeared on the old man's face. He asked back, "A cicada?" I shook my head and said with full seriousness, "A summer." He was slightly taken aback. Then he let out a hearty laugh, reached out to take my summer cicada, and peeled back the shoe brocade, wrapping it, revealing the purple sandalwood box beneath. He slowly rose to his feet. The sword case, as if possessed by a spirit, stood upright on its own. He pressed his hand on the top of the case and said softly, "The nation's vengeance unavenged. I grow old before my time in the case. The immortal sword sings in the night. Little one, watch closely." As his words fell, the sword case suddenly trembled. Strands of azure, sword aura seeped out from it, casting the old man and me in a shimmering emerald glow. Then, with his command to summon the sword, the case burst open. First, the sword aura soared straight into the sky, piercing the heavens next. A 3-foot blue blade appeared in the world. Once, someone wielded this sword and roamed the land unchecked. My eyes were filled with unconcealable shock. Sometimes a single cicada encapsulates an entire summer. Sometimes a single sword overturns more than half the world. Chapter 1. The 6 steeds came from the Central Plains. 40 springs and autumns passed. 2 generations saw flowers bloom and wither. The year I turned 20, a horse team arrived at Danshao's stronghold, 6 men and 6 horses in total. Yet the arrogance they exuded was more overbearing than 600 armored cavalry. At the head was a white-robed young master with a face as fair as jade. At first glance, he gave one the feeling of a spring breeze. His mount, second only to Salutsi, was a celestial horse that constantly reminded everyone that this noble young man was no ordinary official's son, enough to make ordinary people stand in awe, and then step back. On 3 war horses were 3 young men with strikingly similar faces. Every move bore the strong mark of military discipline, and they openly wore standard-issue military sabers at their waists. The man riding the dark steed Wuzhue was a local bully, riding on his father's influence. he could walk sideways across the northwestern region. The last person, riding Salutsi, wore a wide robe with a hood covering their face. One could vaguely tell it was a woman. The white-robed gentleman appeared amiable, but in truth, he was deeply proud and somewhat indifferent to others. He was exceptionally warm only to the woman riding the swift steed Saluzzi. The local bigwig cautiously asked the man addressed as Brother Lee about the white-robed gentleman's background and why he carried such an air. Brother Lee pointed upward with a finger and whispered, "A big shot sent from above." The local bigwig was secretly stunned. His own father was already a third-rank military governor wielding real power. Above, there were only the true second-rank nobles who could wear crimson robes. That the white-robed gentleman was considered a big shot by Brother Lee was something worth pondering carefully. Danxia Stockade occupied a vast area, but what truly made it famous was a cavalry battle decades ago, personally led by two grand commanders who had long been renowned. The two most elite cavalry forces of that era clashed at Danxia Stockade, darkening the sky and earth. Corpses littered the ground, blood flowed like rivers, and the ancient battlefield still remains desolate and uninhabited to this day. Legends say the restless spirits of countless fallen soldiers gather into ghostly troops, haunting this place and turning it into a cursed land. The destination of this group of 6 is precisely this ancient battlefield, regarded as a cursed and dangerous place. These young men and women, clearly from prominent families, did not bring any servants. Shortly after arriving at Danxia Stronghold, the local fixer began arranging for a guide. But because that place is so ominous, they couldn't find a single one. This infuriated the white-robed young master, who was eager to impress the beautiful lady. His voice grew slightly deeper. The local fixer kept wiping sweat from his forehead, having already raised the guide's hiring price to 100 taels of silver. What can 100 taels of silver do? It could buy 10 mu of prime farmland in Jiangnan, or even 20 mu in a harsh, cold region like the Northwest. For an ordinary family, saving enough to buy 20 mu of land would take generations of effort, perhaps 5 generations, perhaps 6, perhaps something they could never achieve. Even so, no one came. The common people fear officials as if they were tigers. With these individuals clearly acting like officials' children, how many would be foolish enough to step forward? Silver coins are well and good, but whether they'll end up in our hands is another matter. Even if they do, heading to that death trap, will we have a chance to spend them? As time passed, the white-clad lord's face finally darkened. Just as the local tough was on the verge of despair, I stepped forward. "You're heading to the ancient battlefield." I know my appearance was abrupt, as if I'd popped out of nowhere, yet also natural, as if I'd been standing there all along. This contrast made the woman riding the Saluzzi horse give me an extra glance. I wore a clean, simple blue cloth robe with a long, thin object wrapped carefully in cotton cloth on my back. Of average build, I wore a clean and natural smile, much like the northwestern sky, vast and empty. The woman had seen many outstanding men. Take the white-clad lord beside her, for instance. He was handsome, with no lack of cunning and skill. Compared to the white-clad lord, I was hardly considered handsome or outstanding. In fact, I was rather unremarkable. Yet I carried an aura that felt refreshing and new, like galloping across the northwestern plains on horseback, an undaunted, forward-charging momentum. Her face was hidden beneath the hood, and she pursed her lips in a faint smile, as if she had glimpsed an amusing sight. Then she withdrew her gaze, and both her expression beneath the hood and her thoughts returned to calm. To a woman who had known the vastness of the sky since childhood, I was somewhat interesting, but not enough to pique her curiosity or make her delve deeper, let alone leave a mark on her heart. After all, there were far too many outstanding men in the world. I was like a sturdy young tree in the forest, though I had a few distinct traits. I would ultimately blend into the vast woods, indistinguishable from the rest. Even facing 6 young nobles from high-ranking families, the smile on my face did not waver. I said neither humbly nor arrogantly, 100 taels of silver, no haggling. I'll take you there and bring you back, safe and sound. The local tough pulled a white cloth from his sleeve to wipe the sweat off his brow and said impatiently, "As long as you can get us through, you'll get your silver." Just then, the young man in white suddenly asked me my name, his tone dripping with undisguised condescension. I didn't mind and gave a grin, revealing a row of pearly white teeth. Su Beiyou, I said, a name that seemed out of place in this humble village. Chapter 2. A frog in the well peers at its rim. I was born in the Northwest and grew up there, making me a true Northwesterner through and through. Yet my face isn't as rugged as other Northwestern men's. My features are quite soft, more like those of a Southern man. Many elders saw this as having a Northern body with a Southern face, a sign of good fortune. But for all these years, I've never really had much luck. I don't know who my parents are, who my ancestors are. Even my name was given by an old scholar in a small village called Xiaofang. I grew up eating from many households, with no tile over my head, no patch of land to stand on, and I never learned any skill to make a living. If it weren't for the few days I learned from an old man passing through Xiaofang as a child, which made me strong, I probably have died in some nameless corner by now. The white-robed nobleman naturally had no interest in learning the origin of my name, nor did he intend to haggle over 100 taels of silver. For many ordinary families, 100 taels might be an astronomical sum, but for him, it might not even cover the pocket change for a drinking party. If he could make the beauty by his side happy, what did 10,000 taels matter? Compared to the woman beside him, it was hardly worth mentioning. He was only interested in the long, bundle-like object strapped to my back, bluntly asking if I could use a sword. My expression remained calm, and I replied in the official dialect with a slight Northwestern accent that I knew a thing or two. After all, the Northwest is no place like the Central Plains. There are many swordsmen and quite a few bandits. Traveling alone, one must have some means of self-defense. However, I made it clear beforehand that place is indeed eerie, and over the years, not a few people have strayed into it, with very few ever making it out alive. A hint of barely perceptible disdain flickered across the young man in White's handsome face. In his eyes, my words sounded as ridiculous as a rabbit telling an eagle that the cliff ahead was too deep. The three sword-bearing men behind him made no effort to hide their mocking grins. My expression shifted slightly. The long sword wrapped in cotton cloth on my back gave an almost imperceptible tremble. Almost no one noticed, but at the same time, the woman who had been silently observing raised her head with a seemingly casual motion. From beneath the shadow of her hood, her gaze once again fell upon me. A tall man with a saber at his waist patted his military blade. A trace of mockery laced his smile. He said I needn't worry about that. No one would gamble with their own life. Since they were determined to go, they knew exactly what kind of place it was. The local big shot simply pulled a 100-tael banknote from his sleeve, tossed it at my feet, and said impatiently, "Isn't it just money you're after? Take it and stop your nagging." I didn't rush to pick up the banknote at my feet, nor did I even spare another glance. I just stared at the young man in white and said slowly, "You all must be from official families. If anything goes wrong, I, a commoner, can't bear the responsibility. So I need to ask one more time." The young man in white was already faintly annoyed. Suppressing his anger, he said coldly, "Even if the sky falls, I'll hold it up." He was about as stooped to my level. Only then did I bend down to pick up the banknote, carefully tucking into my sleeve. I nodded and said, "I'll leave now. I'm not a man who has seen much of the world. I've never even been beyond the Northwest. All I know are a few tales picked up from traveling merchants. How could I possibly grasp the grand schemes in the minds of these young lords and ladies? I was curious why these scions of official families were heading to that dead land. Could there be some treasure there? But even if there were treasures, these young masters and misses who constantly prattle about how a son of a wealthy house shouldn't sit under the eaves. How could they personally take such risks? At most, they would find some scapegoats to do it. Could it really be, as they said, just going to see the scenery? If that were the case, in my opinion, these young masters and ladies must have had their heads kicked by a donkey. I dutifully led the 6 people and 6 horses out of Danxia village. I walked briskly ahead, swift as the wind. The 6 followed slowly on horseback. As for these 6 fine horses, I did not give them a second glance, afraid that if I looked too much, I would not be able to forget them. Although I was a frog at the bottom of a well, and did not understand the deeper meaning these 6 horses represented, I roughly understood that compared to the 100 taels of silver in my hand, the value of these horses was absolutely worlds apart. From traveling on foot to riding cellular purple, the difference between the two was certainly more than just one world. My body looked thin and weak, but in fact, my physical stamina was excellent. After running continuously for over 10 li, I still showed no signs of fatigue. However, the woman riding the Saluzi suddenly said she wanted to rest for a while. It was clear that the others all looked up to the young man in white as their leader, and the young man in white obeyed every word of the woman draped in a large cloak. Since she had spoken, the others had no reason to oppose. As for me, I certainly wouldn't oppose either. After all, we were traveling on foot, and soon we would be entering that eerily strange ancient battlefield. It was always wise to save some strength. The group rested one by one. I sat alone on a rock, staring blankly at the Qing River as it rushed by in the distance. The woman dismounted from a Saluzi. After whispering a few words to the young man in white, she walked straight up to me, softly asking who I had learned swordsmanship from. I looked at her with a hint of caution. After hesitating for a moment, I said it was from my master. She pressed further, asking who my master was. I told her my master was just my master. I didn't know his name either. She chuckled softly and said she could tell. I do have some cultivation. To have such cultivation in a small place like this is no easy feat. I was stunned for a moment and asked back if she also practiced swordsmanship. She shook her head, saying she didn't practice the sword. Actually, she hadn't been entirely sure earlier whether I had cultivation or not, but now she was certain. A bit embarrassed by my slow realization, I cleared my throat and then added, "You must be an expert too." She didn't answer, just pursed her lips and smiled faintly. Unfortunately, her face was hidden beneath her hood, depriving me of the chance to witness that breathtakingly beautiful sight. She sized me up twice, whether it was the first time or the second. Her assessment of me was somewhat interesting, but after the second look, a hint of pity crept in. She felt sorry that such a young man had been born in the harsh, cold Northwest, with no opportunity to see the vast world beyond. Because after all, no matter how interesting a frog at the bottom of a well may be, it's still just a toad. She suddenly asked about my master and parents. I was silent for a moment, calmly said that the master had gone somewhere unknown. I haven't seen him for almost 10 years now. As for my parents, I've never met them. She fell silent, hesitating as if to speak. She seemed to want to apologize, but didn't know how. I rubbed my face, and a hint of a smile returned to it. I said since I, Su Beiyou, have managed to live this long safely, without freezing to death or starving to death, it means that heaven doesn't want to take me yet. Then I must live a life worth living. As I spoke, I patted the long sword wrapped in cotton cloth on my back. Smiling, I added, "Besides, I still have it." The woman's eyes seemed to glaze over for a moment. She murmured softly, "Is it ordained that some are born to rule?" Having read little since childhood, I may not fully grasp the meaning of these words, but I know the simplest truth. Even a frog at the bottom of a well may one day leap onto the rim and see the vast world beyond. After a brief rest, the group of 7 continued their march toward the ancient battlefield. Along the way, the signs of human habitation grew sparser. Not a single bird or beast was seen. Even faint mist began to gather around them. My expression grew increasingly solemn. Meanwhile, a faint smile tugged at the lips of the young man in white. Anyone with clear eyes could see we were drawing closer and closer to the goal of our journey. Through my conversation with the woman, I roughly learned the identities of these people. The leading young man in white was from the imperial capital, named Beiyou. The 3 young men with blades were brothers, apparently from a military family in Shiliang Prefecture. Their names were Li Song, Li Hua, and Li Heng. As for the local bully, he was a native-born official's son from Shanzhou. If not for these young masters wanting to play a game of traveling incognito, just this local official's son alone would have been enough to alarm all the officials of Danxiao village. As for the woman's identity, she did not reveal it herself, so I didn't press the matter. After the group walked for about another hour, suddenly, the surroundings turned cold and damp. The mounts of the 6 people began to grow restless, except for the woman's Saluzi. The other 5 horses even showed varying degrees of terror. The woman riding Saluzi remained perfectly calm, her expression still as placid as water. She asked me if I had ever seen ghost soldiers. I was walking at the front, and without looking back, I said I had. They were just suits of armor, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. But that was 3 or 4 years ago. I accidentally stumbled into this place. and almost died at the hands of those ghosts. The woman seemed intrigued, and then asked, according to the books, ghost soldiers exist between the physical and the ethereal. Ordinary blades and spears can hardly harm them, unless you smash the entire suit of armor to pieces, depriving it of its dwelling place. Otherwise, they're extremely difficult to kill. So how did I manage to escape? I paused for a moment, then calmly uttered 2 words. The woman nodded thoughtfully at the mention of using a sword. She showed neither surprise nor doubt. However, Li Song and his companions let out a disdainful snort. Their contempt was written all over their faces. Clearly, they did not believe that I could still wield a sword. Using a sword isn't just about showing off a few fancy moves. Not to mention those transcendent immortals dwelling above the clouds. The Imperial Court has divided worldly martial artists into 9 grades, following the 9-rank system used for official positions. Ordinary local soldiers are 9th grade. The elite bodyguards of the military commissioner are 8th grade. The armored soldiers of the Frontier Regular Army are 7th grade. The elite scouts of the Frontier Army are 6th grade. The personal guards of some powerful governors are 5th grade. The armored soldiers of the 3,000 camps of the Imperial Capital's Forbidden Army are 4th grade. The inner guards and secret guard experts are 3rd grade. As for 1st grade and 2nd grade masters, they either become consultants to the Ministry of Justice or become commanders of the inner guards or secret guards. Some are even hired as guest advisors by powerful nobles. In summary, as long as one enters a grade, whether you work for the government or live by the code of the Jianghu, you can still put on a dignified front. I can break through the ghost soldiers. I must have at least the strength of a 6th or 7th rank. So how did I end up in such a miserable state now? I didn't try to defend myself. I simply took from my back the long sword wrapped in cotton cloth. Holding in hand, our group continued deeper for over 100 paces. Suddenly, a series of blurry dark figures appeared in the distance. They were indistinct, barely visible in the faint mist. Ghost soldiers, I and Duanmu, you spotted these dark figures almost simultaneously. Both of us had slightly changed expressions. The difference was that Duanmu you was excited, while I was worried. When these ghost soldiers were alive, they might have shown deference to the backgrounds of these noble scions. But since they're already dead, it doesn't matter if you're the emperor's daughter or the prime minister's son. They will kill you just the same. Duanmu you looked with interest at the dark figures gradually approaching. He had an air of being unflappable, even in the face of a mountain collapsing. He smiled faintly and asked me if I was sure I could kill all these things. 100 taels of silver each. I frowned and asked what he meant. He said flatly that in about half an hour, this place would reenact the mirage of 2 armies fighting from back then. Since I was here to enjoy the view, it was natural to want some peace and quiet. My mind was in turmoil. The woman riding the horse, Saluzi, shook her head at me, softly telling me not to force myself. After a brief silence, I first smiled slightly at the woman, then turned to look at Duanmu Yu and said firmly, "Good." Duanmu Yu sat high on his horse, looking down at me, as if looking at a jumping clown. Expressionless, I slowly shook off the cotton cloth wrapped around my long sword. The next moment, I flicked the sword out of its sheath. Then everyone saw a brilliant flash of sword light streak across their vision. In an instant, I was already in front of Ghost Soldier. This Ghost Soldier was entirely clad in a pitch-black suit of armor, its style resembling the border army armor from decades ago. Yet, after years of battle and the erosion of time, it was already incomplete and battered, with dark chi seeping constantly through the gaps. I held my sword in one hand and thrust it straight at the Ghost Soldier's face. This strike was incredibly fast, like a dazzling rainbow, carrying an air of unyielding determination. The Ghost Soldier had no time to react before the blade pierced through its head, killing it beyond any doubt. Li Song and the others, who had mocked me earlier, were stunned. Had they misjudged me? Could this country bumpkin from the northwest actually be a master? The woman gazed at my figure, a hint of barely concealed surprise on her face. She murmured to herself, "This is Sword 1. Even 9 deaths, no regret." Then I withdrew my sword and stepped back, before spinning my body around, drawing a large circle with my long sword, casually deflecting the long sabers slashed down by the remaining Ghost Soldiers. A downward slash from a Ghost Soldier could split an ordinary person in 2 from head to toe. But under my sword strike, it seemed soft and powerless, easily deflected with a gentle flick. Seeing the scene, the woman finally confirmed her earlier suspicions. The expression beneath her hood was complex, as if carrying a hint of relieved understanding, so that's how it is, and also a touch of regret. She sighed softly, sword 2, settle the square and circle, unmoving. I then used the third sword technique. Blazing sword light wove into a net, enveloping all those ghost soldiers. Sword 3, the heaven-covering net never misses. The woman murmured softly. I didn't expect to see the 36 sword techniques here. Truly, this journey was not in vain. She no longer watched the rest of the battle, even though my cultivation was still weak, and I could not unleash the true essence of the 36 sword techniques. Dealing with these ghost soldiers was like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken overkill. Why did I dare to lead these noble children here? It was precisely because of the sword manual and the long sword left by that old man back then. One man, one sword, the sword named Tianlan. I grasped Tianlan without any hesitation, moving among the ghost soldiers with the swiftness of a startled swan. 3 sword strokes, still those 3 sword strokes. Only 3 sword strokes, no more. Yet they surpassed countless swords in the world. The sword momentum flowed in one continuous breath, breaking enemies like sweeping away withered grass. Except for Beiyou, who remained calm. Everyone else was stunned, mouths agape. My swordsmanship was extraordinary. It was like an immortal's sword art, completely free of any trace of artificiality. Especially the 3 Li brothers. Born into a military family, they had come across many martial arts experts in the army. They could tell my cultivation level was not high, around a 6th rank at most. But within this realm, no one could achieve the same smoothness and ease as I did, even bordering on the mysterious. Not to mention them, even Beiyou, who had seen much of the world, fell into a brief silence. When I sheathed my sword and turned back, the local bully muttered a quiet remark about a martial artist. The 3 Li brothers had long shed their earlier contemptuous expressions. Li Song's face was filled with emotion. He murmured to himself, "Excellent swordsmanship." The woman tilted her head slightly, glancing toward Beiyou beside her. From this angle, she could only see his profile, whether by coincidence or her impeccable timing. A faint, barely noticeable malicious smirk flickered at the corner of Beiyou's mouth. Having taken it all in, the woman looked away. A cold, composed smile emerged on her face, hidden beneath the hood. This nobleman, staring at me with such a dark gaze, might not yet realize that in that very moment, he had been crossed off her long list of candidates. His little dream of winning the beauty's hand had no hope of ever coming true. Had I overheard the woman's soft muttering, I would have been surprised that these sword moves even had a string of fancy names. Actually, I only know that these 3 sword moves are named Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3. As for, though 9 deaths, no regret. Within the square, immovable and covering the sky, net unbroken. I have never even heard of them. Right now, what I care about most is the silver Beiyou promised. Just now, I killed a full 12 ghost soldiers. According to his promise, that's 1,200 taels of silver. To me, this is already a huge fortune. As the saying goes, poverty stunts ambition. A lean horse has long hair. No matter how lofty my aspirations, I must first have a full stomach before I can talk about anything else. Though the ancient battlefield was eerie, there were many ghost soldiers. After all, most of the bodies had already been taken away by their comrades back then. Only a few remains were left behind here. After dealing with this wave of ghost soldiers, everyone enjoyed a brief moment of peace. After taking the banknote from Beiyou, I sheathed my long sword again. I walked off to the side by myself, simply plopped down on the ground, closed his eyes and breathed lightly. In a fit of rage, he slew 12 ghost soldiers. The burden was still too heavy for me. If not for the advantage of Tianlan, I would have exhausted myself after killing the 6th ghost soldier. And in such a perilous place, exhaustion means more harm than good. After about the time it takes half a stick of incense to burn, I opened my eyes again. My breathing began to steady, but the right hand holding the sword still trembled slightly. It seems the continuous sword strikes left quite a lasting effect. I won't be able to display such prowess again in a short time. I subconsciously touched the silver notes in my sleeve. The corner of my mouth curled into a slight upward arc. All of this was seen by the woman not far away. She walked to my side and asked softly, "Is it worth trading your life for such a small amount of silver?" "Worth it?" I restrained a smile at the corner of my mouth. My expression returned to calm. There was neither the joy of sudden wealth, nor the inferiority when facing these aristocratic children. He just shook his head, extending the index and middle fingers of his right hand. I said there were two reasons. First, I wouldn't act rashly without certainty. Second, wealth and honor are sought amidst risks. These silver pieces might mean nothing to you, but to me, they are a rare fortune. So it's worth it. The woman was silent for a moment, then sighed softly and said that this kind of fortune was, after all, a bit cheap. I smiled and said it was like people. I've always believed that the saying all people are equal in nobility is a complete load of nonsense. In fact, no matter where, people are divided into noble and base. That's why people like us at the bottom strive desperately to climb up, hoping to transform from a base person into a noble one. A noble one, the woman murmured to herself. In the end, just another person, I said expressionlessly, also speaking in a low voice, but for a noble person, treating oneself as a human being. It's easy to treat others as equals. Hard. I haven't read many books, but I do understand human feelings and worldly affairs. Locals look down on outsiders. The older look down on the younger. Those from the capital look down on those from the provinces. Those from Jiangdu look down on those from Zhongdu. Essentially, all are commoners. All are small-time characters, none better than the other. Yet they still insist on dividing into ranks. Still want to be a cut above others. Even commoners are like this, let alone those high and mighty families who already trample over commoners. Commoners and noble families are essentially two different worlds. The distance between them cannot be measured in miles. At some point, the fog suddenly thickened. Deep within the fog, a massive shadow was silently spreading. The clanging of weapons and neighing of horses instantly captured all our attention. Moments later, first one rider burst out from the black fog. Then 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 in just a few breaths. A massive cavalry charged out of the black fog, appeared on this ancient battlefield. These cavalrymen were all clad in black armor. Their mounts uniformly black horses with black saddles, like an army of ghosts emerging from the netherworld. On the other side, there was also a menacing cavalry force. The difference was that this cavalry was all clad in silver armor. Their mounts uniformly white horses with white saddles, forming a stark contrast with the earlier black cavalry. Everyone's gaze was fixed on this scene. I finally understood why these noble scions insisted on coming here in person. Such a sight was truly magnificent. If one couldn't see it with their own eyes, it would indeed be a lifelong regret. Duan Muyu's lips moved slightly. He murmured that this was the great battle between the northeastern and northwestern cavalry forces back then. The two cavalry forces did not immediately charge, but had a brief standoff. Then one rider from each side came forward, as if discussing something. But the ancient battlefield only preserved images from that time, but didn't capture the sound. What exactly the two were saying was impossible to know. The woman's lips moved slightly, and she explained to me, "Those two are the Grand Commanders." I just said, "Oh." My expression calm. Grand Commander. For an ordinary person like me, it was far, far beyond reach. Like clouds in the sky. Within sight, but beyond reach. Their conversation didn't last long. It seemed they parted on bad terms. After each returned to their own formation, the two cavalry began a head-on charge. This was a sight I would never forget. The cavalry covered the earth, their charge like a single great tide. Though it was silent at that moment, in my ears, I could already hear the thunderous rumble of hooves like rolling thunder. The ground trembled incessantly under the pounding hooves. Dust filled the air. The two lines of cavalry surged forward like a thunderous tide. Moments later, the two cavalry forces collided with a thunderous crash. Blades cut through flesh and bone. We all turned pale. Our minds trembled at such power. It was almost the peak of human strength. An individual caught in it was truly like a floating duckweed, utterly insignificant. The two armies slaughtered each other. At every moment, someone was killed and fell from their horse. This battle could be called brutal, even without the battle cries, the hoofbeats and whinnies. the groans of the dying, the dull sound of blades piercing bodies. The cruelty of the battlefield still greatly shocked our group. Even the 3 Li brothers, born into a military family, felt the same. The woman murmured. In the 3rd year of Jiangwen, Cha Mang led the Northeast Army to capture Shanzhou. Then Mu Rinxi personally led the main army to advance on Shihe Prefecture, capturing 36 forts and strongholds in succession, and besieging the city of Zhongdu. At this critical moment of crisis, Grand Commander Su Lin, entrusted with a critical mission in a time of crisis, led the Northwestern Army against the Northeastern Army at Daoist Stockade, and emerged victorious, lifting the siege of Zhongdu. Zhang Mang and Mu Rinxi barely escaped with a meager force of 20,000 remnants. As the woman muttered to herself, the tide of battle on the field began to shift gradually. The silver-armored cavalry showed signs of collapse, while the black-armored cavalry appeared poised to swallow them whole. Just then, a detachment of about 3,000 cavalry broke away from the silver-armored ranks, with a resolute, death-defying stance, charging straight at the black-armored cavalry. Heavy cavalry, these were heavily armored riders and horses alike. Though only 3,000 strong, their charge rivaled that of 30,000 light cavalry. Their combined, immense momentum instantly tore through the black-armored cavalry's battle line, sweeping everything before them like a force of nature. Charging headlong, this was a poignant and tragic scene, though the heavy cavalry was invincible. But unfortunately, human strength has its limits. Facing enemies tens of times their number, they could only die with bitterness on the battlefield. The woman pointed at that heavy cavalry commander and whispered to me that his name was Su Dan. At this moment, Su Dan was covered in blood, facing death calmly, confronting the charge of the Northwest Army. Leading his few remaining guards, he advanced instead of retreating. He charged head-on into the boundless cavalry. This was his final charge. In the grim and fierce battle, Su Dan's guard were the first to die. Then Su Dan fell in battle, and the Northeast Army, seizing this brief opportunity, broke away from the battlefield and fled, gradually disappearing into the black mist. The outcome was decided. The Northwest Army gritted their teeth and gave chase. The 2 cavalry forces gradually faded into the distance. The ancient battlefield fell silent again. The woman suddenly asked me if I knew where that armored cavalry unit was now. I glanced at this somewhat unconventional young lady from a noble family. She was the only one among the group who didn't regard me as inferior. Since she treated me with sincerity, I naturally treated her with sincerity in return. So I answered very straightforwardly that I didn't know. She seemed a bit proud, lifting her head slightly, revealing a delicate chin from the shadow of her hood, along with a small curve of her fair neck. Only at this moment did the woman show a hint of worldly vitality. She slowly said, "This iron cavalry followed the founding emperor as they marched eastward through the pass, first entering the eastern capital, then Jiangdu, heading all the way south, pacifying the entire realm, thus giving rise to today's vast territory of Great Qi. Now, in the imperial court, half of the princes and nobles came from this very army. After witnessing this magnificent mirage spectacle, these noble sons and daughters lost their interest in staying. They began preparing to return to Daoist Stockade. Su Beiyou naturally had no objection, but this time he didn't walk at the front. Instead, he took up the rear. He wanted to ensure no further mishaps occurred at the final stage. The woman riding the Saluzi horse took the lead. She didn't speak to Su Beiyou again. In fact, she didn't even acknowledge Duan Muyu, who was eagerly trying to win her favor. She seemed lost in thought. On the other hand, because of Su Beiyou's swift slaying of 12 ghost soldiers earlier, Li Song, a scion of a military family, had significantly warmed up to Su Beiyou. When the group returned to Daoist Stockade, it was already dusk. Under the setting sun, Daoist Stockade resembled an old man in his twilight years, silently resting in the wilderness of the Northwest. The 6 fine horses had come and gone in a hurry, leaving no trace on this old man. Before leaving, the woman still didn't tell Su Beiyou her name. She only told him, "Don't stay in this small place your whole life. If I ever get the chance, I still need to step outside and see the vast world out there." Su Beiyou watched the group leave Dansha village, then headed out of the village himself. But his direction was the exact opposite of those 6. Truth be told, he still had a small house of his own, built by the old man with his own hands when Beiyou was learning from him. However, that barely habitable house was far away in Xiaofeng village. So Beiyou still had to walk more than a dozen li through the night to get home. The northwest wasn't the safest place at night, but for Beiyou, it was nothing to worry about. The journey was uneventful, and by the time he returned to Xiaofeng village, the night had grown deep, the entire village pitch black, with not a single light to be seen. After all, for ordinary folks, candles and lamp oil were expensive luxuries, rarely bought or used under normal circumstances. Beiyou groped his way into the village in the dark, returned home, and leaped onto the roof of his small house, gnawing on a flatbread that was almost as hard as a rock by moonlight. He also touched the banknotes tucked against his chest. Lost in thought, the woman had advised him to step out and see the outside world. In fact, this had always been his long-cherished wish. He, a frog at the bottom of a well, had been looking at the mouth of the well for far too long, but he was troubled by many ties and unable to leap out of the well. Now that he had this 1,300 taels of silver, he had the capital to jump out of the well. Beiyou pondered for a long time. He took out that stack of banknotes. 13 notes, in total 1 was given by the local bully, and the other 12 were given by Beiyou. He divided the banknotes into 2 stacks. One stack of 1,000 taels, the other of 300 taels. Beiyou put the stack of 300 taels back into his bosom, gazing at the 1,000-tael banknote in his hand. He muttered to himself, "After I settle things here, I should also leave." The next morning, Beiyou went to the small courtyard at the northernmost end of Xiaofeng village. This place could barely be called a private school, and it was also the private tutor's home. In the bitter cold of the northwest like this, and in a poor village like Small Square Stockade, ranked last among all stockades, there was actually such a thing as a private school. It could almost be called a miracle, yet it really had happened, just like how that old man carrying a sword had passed through Small Square Stockade back then. Both were equally incredible. Beiyou pushed open the wicker gate and entered the small courtyard. In the yard, a few hens were foraging for food, and in the corner, there was a lush green vegetable patch. A spirited old man sat in a reclining chair in front of the thatched hut, gently tapping his knees, humming a tune that no one else could understand. This old man was the teacher at Small Square Stockade's private school, who had been teaching in the village for over 30 years. Beiyou had once heard the elders in the stockade say that the old gentleman was an outsider, probably from the Central Plains region. When he first arrived, he put on quite a grand show, not like ordinary folk, rather seemed to come from a wealthy family. But after living most of his life, the old man, aside from his scholarly air, could no longer show any trace of his former wealth and status. Beiyou's name was also given by the old gentleman. In fact, Beiyou had lived with this old man since he was very young, until he met another old man. Then things changed. It's rather amusing to say. Back then, because of Beiyou, the 2 old men had a conflict of no small significance, until the old man carrying a sword left Xiaofeng village. The 2 old men were in a state of mutual dislike and discord. Whenever they met, they would argue, full of classical literary phrases, quoting scriptures and classics, of course. In the eyes of the people of Xiaofeng village, this could hardly be considered arguing. After all, they didn't even use half a swear word. And throughout the whole village, only Beiyou could half understand them. How could this be called arguing? What exactly were the names of the 2 old men? Beiyou was not even sure. He called the sword-carrying old man master, and the old man from the private school teacher. This was how he distinguished them. And both old men tacitly accepted their respective titles. As Beiyou had said, no matter what the master was called, a master was a master. In the present case, then, a teacher was a teacher. Beiyou approached the old man and said softly, "Teacher, I'm here." The old man opened his half-closed eyes, glanced at Beiyou, and asked, "What? Are you leaving?" Beiyou was not at all surprised by the old man's foresight. After all, the old man before him probably understood him best, and had seen much of the world. It was no wonder he could guess a thing or two. He softly murmured in acknowledgement, took out the 1,000-tael silver note, and placed it in the old man's hand. He said, "Teacher, this is 1,000 taels of silver. Consider it a small token of my gratitude to the village. I wouldn't feel at ease leaving it with anyone else. I can only trouble you with it." The old man did not ask where the silver came from. He simply took the banknote calmly. Said indifferently, "Beiyou, I knew that sooner or later you would step out into the world. After all, you're a fine young man. Unlike me, an old fellow already half buried in the ground. It wouldn't be fitting for you to always be cooped up in this tiny place. But since you want to go out, you must understand the meaning of the wickedness of human hearts. What appears good may not be good, and what appears evil may not be evil. This world has never been simply black and white. More often than not, black and white are mingled together. Matters have right and wrong. But when taking action, one does not necessarily have to follow right and wrong. In the years of war long ago, the common people exchanged their children for food. Put bluntly, it was people eating people. Was that right? Certainly not. But if you didn't eat, you would starve to death. So would you eat or not? Beiyou was stunned. He had never imagined that his teacher, always a man of integrity and virtue, would utter such heresy. For a moment, he was at a loss for how to answer. The old man sighed emotionally. "I have read 10,000 books in my life and traveled 10,000 miles. In matters of the world, I have gained some insights, speaking some muddled words. People have good and evil, black and white. But what exactly is good? What is evil?" Back then, Li Su and Qing Chun discussed the way. Qing Chun said bluntly, "What is good to me is good. What is evil to me is evil." So-called good and evil. You can catch a glimpse. At the root of it all, it's nothing but putting profit first. Beiyou swallowed his saliva. To calm himself, he didn't know who Li Su and Qing Chun were, but he understood the meaning of the master's words. The old man seemed stirred by past events, his expression dazed, with nostalgia in his eyes. He murmured to himself, "Xiao Yu founded the foundation of this dynasty, killing through a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, and also killing out a splendid land of rivers and mountains. Did anyone ever call him evil?" Back then, the youngest son of the rebel leader of the White Lotus sect, drowned alive while still in swaddling clothes. Yet some say he is kind. Iron cavalry sweeps south, ushering in eternal peace. Today's great Qi, yesterday's great Zheng. Which one didn't see rivers of blood? Which one didn't build towers of bones? Killing to attain peace, what kind of reasoning is that? The old man suddenly rose from his reclining chair. Staring at Beiyou, he bellowed, "Where's the reasoning?" Beiyou shoot de, and instinctively touched Tianlan, strapped to his back. In that moment, inspiration struck. He replied, "The reasoning is behind me." "This is reasoning?" The old man was stunned. Then, as if drained of all strength, he slowly sank back into his chair and said weakly, "You may go." Beiyou opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. The old man waved his hand, motioning for him to get lost. He said irritably, "I've crossed more bridges than you've walked roads. I don't need you to remind me of the wisdom of not showing off wealth." Beiyou was finally about to leave the land that had raised him, to see the vast world outside. Beiyou carried Tianlan and a bundle on his back. Inside the bundle were a few changes of clothes, some loose silver coins, a few relatively soft flatbreads, a piece of smoked meat wrapped in oil paper, and the 300 taels of silver notes. No one came to see him off. He walked alone to the gate of Xiaofeng village, glanced back once, and then left directly. Next, he had to go to Danxiao village, and from there follow a caravan out of the western river plain, heading to the founding emperor's place of rise, the central capital. Beiyou had never seen much of the world. The biggest place he had been to was Danxiao village, but that didn't stop him from being magnanimous. As the teacher put it, this was innate, not something to be forced, nor something to envy. Upon arriving at Danxiao village, after finding the caravan he had already arranged near the warehouses on the north side of the village, Beiyou reluctantly gave 10 taels of silver to the escort leader he had known for a long time, thus managing to blend in among the hired escorts of the merchant caravan. He boarded a freight cart and slowly left Danxia stockade with the caravan, embarking on a long journey. Danxia stockade gradually receded behind him until it was finally out of sight. Only then did Beiyou suddenly realize that he had left Danxia stockade and stepped into a brand new, unknown world. Zhongdu, to him, seemed like a place from legends. It was both the place where the founding emperor of this dynasty rose to power and the foremost frontier fortress of the previous dynasty. As for what kind of majestic city it was, Beiyou had never seen it. He had only heard fragments from his teacher. Naturally, he could not imagine it. Zhongdu was like a microcosm of the outside world, dazzling and strange, hazy and indistinct. Like a dream, yes. The world when he was young. His master, the old man who carried the sword, once described to him a different world. In that world, there were no petty trivialities for survival, no forced compromises made for the sake of life, only a grandeur beyond ordinary imagination. In that world, some rowed swords out to sea, some soared up to the heavens, some used the swirling snow as ink to paint, some pulled up a great river and turned it into a single sword slash. There were immortals who roamed the azure sea at dawn and the Kangwu peaks at dusk. There were fierce warriors whose single strength could match 1,000 armies. There were eminent Buddhist monks who, with palms pressed together, could manifest 100 zhong golden body. And there were Taoist masters who, with a kowtow, could make the earth sink and float. Some held a sword and entered the game. Strode across the world, others sat outside the board, playing chess with the world within it. Iron cavalry clashed. Beyond the realm, immortals dueled with magic. There was the Jianghu, with the sweeping gallantry of its wanderers. There was the court, with the strict rules of its officials. That was a world both captivating and endlessly exciting. It was also a world that small figures could only gaze up at in silence. Now, Beiyou did not have the qualifications to enter that world. He could only gaze up in silence, yearning whether it be the world of those noble scions, or the world his master had painted for him. To Beiyou at this moment, both were far too distant as the bright moon hanging in the sky. Beautiful to behold, but only to be looked at. After all, the distance between the two worlds is not merely 10,000 miles in travel. One cannot step into another world. Most people spend their entire lives shut out at the door. The journey was uneventful. After 2 days and 1 night of travel, Beiyou followed the convoy across the West River Plain and arrived at the foot of Zhongdu City. Beiyou's first impression of Zhongdu was its height, almost as high as the mountains. Between two mountain ranges, a majestic city rose abruptly from the ground, towering into the clouds, perfectly connecting the two originally separate ridges. In fact, when they were still more than 10 miles away from Zhongdu, Beiyou could already make out the outline of this majestic city. The entire city of Zhongdu was built against the mountain. From the front, layer upon layer of barbicans stacked upward along the slope. 7 full layers of city walls arranged like terraced fields, enough to daunt any enemy attempting to storm the city from the front. Beiyou stood up from the cargo cart he was riding in. Gazing into the distance, he tried to spot the Zhongdu prince's mansion that his teacher had once mentioned. That residence standing at the highest point of Zhongdu, and the legendary Lingfeng Pavilion, which offered a panoramic view of the entire city. But unfortunately, he did not see it. Even so, Zhongdu still left Beiyou with the deepest impression. Looking up at this majestic city, he suddenly recalled a line of poetry his teacher often muttered while drunk. Why should a man not bear a wu hook? To reclaim the 16 prefectures of Yanyan? Tomorrow, let me ascend the Lingyan Pavilion, sword in hand, enfeoffed as a lord of 10,000 households. The entire city was built against the mountain, so the terrain within the city sloped upward. The outer city had the lowest terrain, and the closer one got to the inner city, the higher the terrain rose. Many powerful families in the city built their residences according to the terrain. The more influential they were, the higher the location of their mansions. As the center of the entire central capital, the royal mansion of central capital naturally stood at the highest point. The mansion covered an extremely vast area. Besides the usual extravagances of the wealthy, such as channeling water into the mansion to create a lake, and constructing pavilions and towers, there was also a man-made peak. The peak was over 30 zhong high and was named Xiaoxiang Mountain. On its slopes stood 4 pavilions built against the mountain. From top to bottom, they were named Lingfeng, Linfeng, Tingfeng, and Yingfeng. At the top of Xiaoxiang Mountain was Lingfeng Pavilion. Although residing in Lingfeng Pavilion did not allow one to overlook the entire central capital, as legend claimed, one could still see a good portion of it. At this moment, a woman was half reclining languidly on a soft couch on the second floor of Lingfeng Pavilion. Propping her cheek with one hand, she gazed out at the vast majority of Zhongdu that seemed to lie just beneath her feet. Her mind wandered, lost in thought. The woman in contemplation possessed a breathtaking beauty, like a goddess statue carved from pure white jade. Though not cold or aloof, she exuded an intangible sense of dignified distance, making her unattainable, an object of distant admiration. After a long while, she finally snapped out of her reverie. First, she sat up straight, then she stretched lazily, showcasing her graceful figure to its full extent. Unfortunately, there was no one else in the pavilion at that moment. Thus, no one had the fortune to witness this rare, enchanting scene. She tidied her clothes, restoring her usual dignified appearance. Then she gently clapped her hands. A maid silently entered the pavilion, with hands naturally at her sides, and crossed over her lower abdomen. The woman murmured softly, "Prepare yourselves. It's time to go back." Nuon. The maid acknowledged with a reply. The woman thought for a moment, then added, "As for Duanmu Yu, ignore him for now. Let him enjoy himself in the northwest for a few more days. As for Aunt Ma Shu, it's better to inform her. Otherwise, she'll start nagging again." The maid acknowledged each instruction one by one. When the Lingfeng Pavilion was left with only the woman alone, she shifted to resting her chin on her hand and sank back into contemplation. Or rather, she stared blankly into space. No one knew how long passed, until a faint sound startled the woman. She snapped back to reality and called softly Banlon. Banlon wasn't a person, but a Persian cat passed down through 3 generations. To this day, the woman still couldn't figure out why her ancestors named a pure white Persian cat after a tiger-striped cat. Banlon as in a striped tiger. However, she had once heard her father mention that the granduncle had kept a tabby cat, named Yangchun, the same Yangchun as in Yangchun Beiyou, spring snow. It and Banlon were mortal enemies. It was not until the granduncle crossed the ocean and went to the state of Wei that Banlon became the sole ruler of the household. As for the white cat Banlon, who had served both her grandmother and mother, this veteran of 3 generations, once its great enemy was gone, grew increasingly lazy and casual. Even towards its new owner, it acted indifferent and aloof. A perfect embodiment of a powerful minister who looked down on everyone and presumed on its seniority. So much so that many maids secretly called it Lord Banlon. After a moment, a snow-white figure nimbly jumped down from the rafters, landing directly beside the woman. A pair of blue eyes surveyed the surroundings with a melancholy gaze, revealing a hint of human-like nostalgia and sadness. 6 decades ago, this had been its home, perhaps accustomed to the wind and sand of the frontier desert. Upon arriving in this bustling place, Beiyou was momentarily at a loss, somewhat dazed. So during his first 3 days in Zhongdu, he wandered aimlessly. Not until the 4th day did he begin to think about how to establish himself in Zhongdu. Then he sadly realized that he had no skills to speak of, making it difficult to earn a living. His only way out seemed to be joining the army. But Beiyou had always been used to freedom. If he wasn't truly at the end of his rope, he didn't want to join the restrictive military. Fortunately, he still had 300 silver taels on him, so he was far from desperate. He wasn't too anxious either. After finding an inn to stay in for now, he decided to visit the Daoist temple within Zhongdu City. Back when the founding emperor was conquering the realm, the Daoist sect had contributed greatly. So after the founding emperor secured his rule, the status of the Daoist sect rose accordingly. Not only was it established as the state religion, but even the patriarch was appointed as the national preceptor. It reached the height of prominence, momentarily overshadowing the Confucian and Buddhist schools, becoming the foremost of the 3 teachings. Everywhere, people began to build Taoist temples on a grand scale. The common folk also converted to the way in droves. In impoverished places like Xiaofang Stockade and Danxia Stockade, there were no Taoist temples. At most, there were a few wandering Taoist priests. But Zhongdu was different. As one of the 4 great capitals of the world, It housed the largest and finest Taoist temple in the northwest, the Chonglong Temple. Su Beiyou was barely half a believer. Having come to Zhongdu, there was no reason not to visit the Chonglong Temple. The Chonglong Temple was located in the inner city, which is also as far as ordinary people could go. Further up lay a continuous expanse of mansions belonging to the powerful and noble. Guarded by armored soldiers, commoners were not permitted inside. As for the Prince's Manor at the highest point, one could only see a blurry outline, visible but forever out of reach. One could only see a vague outline, within sight but beyond reach. A black carriage sped past beyond the towering walls of Chonglong Temple. Inside the carriage were two men. Both wore black brocade robes. The difference was that one robe was embroidered with a flying fish, while the other, though wearing a robe of the same style, lacked the flying fish pattern. The so-called flying fish robe features a dragon's head. With wings and a fish tail, official robes embroidered with the flying fish pattern are commonly known as flying fish robes. According to the laws of the Great Qi, only officials of the third rank or above may wear flying fish robes. Moreover, there is an unwritten rule in the Great Qi officialdom. Only high-ranking officials within the secret guard may wear flying fish robes. Thus, the identities of these two men were self-evident. To the common people, the secret guard was undoubtedly a terrifying name. From high-ranking nobles and officials, down to ordinary citizens, everyone feared this name as if it were a tiger, because the secret guard was the most direct embodiment of the emperor's will, holding the authority and responsibility to investigate and monitor the entire realm. Although nominally under the command of the Grand Commandery, in reality, it was directly subordinate to the emperor. It possessed the imperial prison, independent of the Ministry of Justice and the Court of Judicial Review. Self-contained, since the Shadow Guard claimed to investigate all under heaven. Then, besides the White Tiger Hall established in the capital, branch offices were also set up in various places. Each branch office had one deputy commander, and under the branch, prefectures were divided. Each prefecture had an inspector. Each commandery had a patrol inspector, and each county had a surveillance inspector. In the White Tiger Hall, located in the capital, there were 3 seated commanders, overseeing the overall situation, privately called the 3 chariots of a shadow guard by the world. It was the beginning of the dynasty, and there was no chaotic bestowal of titles, except for those princes, dukes, marquises, and earls. First-rank high officials were still very precious, except for the current Grand Secretary and Grand Commander and a few others. No one else could hold first-rank office. Even a Shadow Guard commander was only of full second rank. Only the commander with the seal was specially granted the rank of vice first rank, vice commander of the second rank, assistant commander of the third rank, inspector of the third sub-rank. Although Zhongdu is only one city, it is equivalent to a prefecture level. It is also the core of the entire Northwest Dark Guard. Since this person can wear the flying fish robe, his identity is obvious. He is exactly the inspector of the Zhongdu Dark Guard. The current inspector of the Zhongdu Dark Guard is surnamed Liu. His given name is Chun. He is both the inspector of the Zhongdu Dark Guard and temporarily holds the position of assistant commander of the Northwest Dark Guard Prefecture. It can be said that he is one of the most powerful people in the entire Northwest region. Liu Chun lifted the curtain and looked at the Taoist temple walls receding outside. His face as calm as water, he asked, "Jian, is everything arranged?" The middle-aged man sitting across from him appeared slightly restrained. He replied respectfully, "According to your lordship's deployment, everything has been arranged." Liu Chun nodded and said, "I have a nephew who recently arrived in Zhongdu. I might be busy later and unable to get away. Therefore, this matter is entrusted to you to manage." The middle-aged man lowered his gaze. He answered in a deep voice. Liu Chun let the curtain fall, looking at his trusted subordinate. Slowly, he said, "Remember, this is a major affair. If it succeeds, you and I may take another step forward. I can remove the acting title from my position as commander, and you can rise one step from your position as inspector, taking over my post as supervisor." A hint of excitement showed on the middle-aged man's face. "Your subordinate thanks you for your guidance, sir." Liu Chun smiled, but there was an inexplicably chilling tone in his smile. "It is still too early to speak of thanks. This matter was personally handed down by Governor Fu of the White Tiger Hall. saying there must be no mistakes. If things go wrong, though it may not cost me my official cap, within our dark guard, being remembered unfavorably by the three governors will mean never advancing a single step in this lifetime. The middle-aged man's expression shifted slightly. Then he couldn't help but nod. Lu Chun closed his eyes, revealing a hint of worn-out, aged weariness, half muttering to himself, "As for this nephew of mine, he's no simple character either. He came from a side of the seal holding commander. Perhaps he's caught wind of something. I'll have to go deal with him personally." Neither side can be slighted. Neither side can be offended. The carriage arrived at the Shadow Guard headquarters, located in the northwest corner of the central capital. Lu Chun got off the carriage alone. At this moment, someone had already been waiting for a long time in the side hall of the Shadow Guard headquarters. When he saw Lu Chun, the high-ranking official governing the Northwestern Shadow Guards, walk in, he showed neither awe nor flattery, but simply rose and performed the etiquette of a junior, as if meeting an elder of his own family. Lu Chun found nothing inappropriate about this. A kind smile appeared on his face, which had grown stern from years of exposure to all sorts of dark secrets. He said gently, "Official duties kept me. Sorry to keep my nephew waiting. If Beiyou were here, he would recognize that the person before him was the one riding the celestial horse, the white-robed young master Beiyou." At this moment, Beiyou's expression was relaxed. He said with a soft laugh, "It is I who have troubled you, uncle." Lu Chun smiled and waved his hand. After the two had taken their seats, he began, "The Northwest is bitterly cold, especially in winter. Heavy snow can kill. You, nephew, have left the prosperous Jiangnan and come to this war-torn land. Which rather puzzles your uncle?" Beiyou smiled calmly. "To be honest, uncle, my original intention this time was to travel beyond the Great Wall. But before I left, my father gave me some instructions. He asked me to bring you a few words." Lu Chun's expression remained unchanged, his smile intact. He said, "Nephew, please speak." After more than half an hour, Lu Chun personally escorted Beiyou out of the Dark Guard estate. A gentle smile never left his face. It wasn't until Beiyou rode away that this flawless smile, revealing no hints or cracks, slowly faded. Perhaps because it had been so long since he had smiled so warmly. Lu Chun's expression turned somewhat stiff. A woman in a black brocade robe appeared silently behind Lu Chun. She whispered, "My lord, these young nobles from the capital, though seemingly respectful and courteous, are actually haughty and arrogant. Deep down, they probably look down on us local folks. With the goodwill you've shown today, you may not remember it in the future." Lu Chun narrowed his eyes, his tone icy. "That reasoning is sound enough. But we can't stay in this northwestern region forever. We'll have to return to the capital eventually. Since we're going back, we should pave the way early. It wouldn't hurt. Chonglong Temple was built in the inner city, also following the contours of the mountain. The deeper the buildings went, the higher the ground they occupied. At the deepest and highest point stood a 9-story pavilion to symbolize the supreme divine power of the Dao ancestor. It housed 10,000 golden lanterns. On every grand festival, the temple's stewards would light all the golden lanterns, blazing bright as daylight, magnificent and grand like a celestial realm. The entire pavilion shone brilliantly, and from all over Zhengdu City, one could see its majestic spectacle, like a heavenly palace. Such a dazzling sight. If one were never to behold it, it would be an immense regret. Chonglong Temple was a Daoist temple that ranked well within the Daoist order, second only to the Zixiao Palace, the ancestral seat of the Daoist sect, the Qingjing Temple in the imperial capital, the Zirong Temple in Jiangdu, and the Taiqing Temple in Qizhou, the Qingshu Palace of Lincian Manor, to serve as abbots of these Daoist temples. Every single one was a heavyweight figure in the Daoist sect. The abbot of Chonglong Temple was relatively unknown. All that was known was that he was a generation higher than the current patriarch of the Daoist sect, considered one of the few remaining elders among the older generation. He held a revered position in Taoism, but not long ago, the old patriarch finally succumbed to the passage of time and suddenly passed away while lecturing his disciples. Because it was so sudden, even the ancestral temple of Taoism was caught off guard. There was no suitable candidate to succeed him as abbot of Chonglong Temple. So now, Chonglong Temple was essentially in a state of being a group without a leader. Su Beiyou did not choose to go to Chonglong Temple with the crowd in the early morning. Instead, he arrived late in the evening when the sun was slanting to the west. For some unknown reason, at this time, there were no other worshippers in Chonglong Temple. The vast Taoist temple was eerily quiet, although Su Beiyou found it somewhat strange. He didn't pay it much mind, simply assuming this was how Chonglong Temple looked at dusk. Su Beiyou stepped through the main gate of Chonglong Temple. He did not pay homage to the statues of the enlightened Taoist ancestors throughout the ages. Instead, he just wandered around. Unfortunately, many areas were off-limits to outsiders, including the 9-story pavilion with 10,000 golden lanterns. Not to mention common folk, like Su Beiyou. Even the provincial governor who ruled an entire state was not allowed a single step inside. After Su Beiyou had seen all the places he could visit, he finally went to the main hall. Here, a seated statue of the ancestor Taoist was enshrined. By now, the sky was growing dark. Lamps had already been lit inside the hall. The statue of the ancestor Taoist wore Taoist robes and had white hair. In his right hand, he held a fly whisk. What set it apart from statues of the ancestor Taoist in other temples was the left hand of the ancestor Taoist statue in Chonglong Temple was coiled with a golden dragon. Since ancient times, emperors have been called the true dragon and son of heaven, using the dragon as a symbol for the emperor. This act of Taoism clearly placed the emperor beneath the Taoist patriarch, which naturally drew a barrage of criticism. Many court officials demanded that Taoism modify the statue of the Taoist patriarch. However, Taoism remained indifferent to all this, turning a deaf ear, and so the statue of the Taoist patriarch survived. Su Beiyou paid his respects to the Taoist patriarch and was about to turn and leave when he accidentally collided with another person. Su Beiyou stepped back half a pace to steady himself and looked up to see a beauty in Taoist robes. She seemed roughly the same age as Su Beiyou, with a petite figure, a head shorter than him, and a delicate, porcelain doll-like face. At that moment, because she had been running, her cheeks bore a charming flush. Su Beiyou, an innocent young man, felt a faint, subtle fragrance waft into his nose. Her heart suddenly tightened. The little Taoist nun raised her head and timidly glanced at Su Beiyou. After meeting Su Beiyou's gaze, she quickly lowered her head again. Thus, there was an awkward moment of silence between them. In the end, it was Su Beiyou who broke the silence first. "Are you all right?" The little Taoist nun's face showed a hint of shyness. She didn't speak, only shook her head. Su Beiyou, for some reason, suddenly thought of the woman riding the purple horse he had encountered not long ago. It seemed that no matter what happened, she always maintained a composed expression, as if Mount Tai could crumble before her, and she wouldn't bat an eye. This formed a stark contrast with the little Taoist nun before him. The two were like two completely different flowers. One was a proud, elegant peony that looked down on all other flowers. The other was a shy, modest mimosa. Each had its own virtues and unique charm. Each had its own allure and flavor. Su Beiyou cleared his throat and asked, "Miss, are you from Chonglong Temple?" She hesitated for a moment. She nodded. "Su Beiyou's my," imitating a scholar. He cupped his hands and said, "My name is Su Beiyou." Su, as in the double-person radical. Bei from Northwest, you from itinerant scholar. The young Taoist nun seemed even more hesitant. After a brief inner struggle, she returned a Taoist salute. Then she said softly, "My Taoist name is Zhiyun. I am currently cultivating at Chonglong Temple." Su Beiyou was about to speak when the lanterns in the hall suddenly dimmed. Killing intent surged. The next moment, Su Beiyou's figure shot up. He pulled the young Taoist nun behind him in one swift motion. At the same time, the Tianlong Kangran sword at his back was unsheathed. He thrust the sword at the uninvited malicious guest who was about to harm the young Taoist nun. This uninvited malicious guest wore a black brocade robe with narrow sleeves and a long front. His belt buckle was a pitch-black tiger head. He wore black-topped, white-soled official boots. In his hand, he held a blade thick-backed and thin-edged. The blade spine is straight, the blade edge slightly curved. The blade is 3 feet long. The handle is 6 inches long, weighing 9 jin and 9 liang. It is the renowned Xiuquan blade. Expert of the Dark Guard, everyone knows that the flying fish robe and the Shochuan blade are the standard equipment of the Dark Guard. But most people don't know that the flying fish robe can only be worn by officials of 3rd rank and above. And the Shochuan blade can only be carried by experts of martial rank 3rd and above. The Shochuan blade and Tianlan clashed once, producing a crisp, clear sound. Beiyou held Tianlan and, instead of retreating, advanced. He took another step forward. The sword light was brilliant, interwoven like a net. However, the sword technique that had crushed the ghost soldiers like dry weeds and smashing rotten wood was like a mere show in front of this Dark Guard expert. The Shochuan blade completely used brute force to overcome skill. With a few slashes, it broke through the sword net. Then it directly approached Beiyou's face. At that very moment, outside the main hall, groups of dark guards in black brocade robes climbed over the walls from all directions and entered Chonglong Temple in an orderly manner, with swords at their waists and heavy crossbows in their hands. After landing, they began to pull the triggers, as buzzing vibrations rang out one after another. Crossbow bolts flew in all directions, like the autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves. They started a bloody massacre of the Daoist priests inside Chonglong Temple. A few Daoist priests on night watch had their heads pierced by bolts almost instantly, without even letting out a single cry. Only the dull thuds of their bodies hitting the ground were heard. In several rooms where lamps had just been lit, bolts were immediately showered over, killing the occupants inside. A dark guard in a 4th rank official robe appeared outside the gate of Chonglong Temple and said in a deep voice, "Everyone inside Chonglong Temple, regardless of gender or age, regardless of identity, not a single one is to be allowed to escape. All are to be killed without exception." The shadow guards following behind him responded in unison. Then they drew the blades at their waists and surged into Chonglong Temple in single file. The shadow guards rushed silently toward the depths of Chonglong Temple, heading straight for the world-renowned 9-story pavilion at its deepest part. That was the core hub of the entire Chonglong Temple. The shadow guards charged all the way. With unstoppable momentum, the ordinary Taoists of Chonglong Temple were mowed down like grass. Some disciples who had cultivation and martial skills, though possessing the capital and strength to fight, were helpless against the overwhelming numbers of the shadow guards. Outnumbered and outmatched, these disciples were doomed to die with bitter regret. Corpses littered the path. Blood flowed like a river. It was true that the Daoist sect had many experts, but within Chonglong Temple, there were only 2 who could truly be called masters. With the death of the old abbot, the remaining one could hardly hold the line alone. This gave the shadow guards an opportunity. The 4th-rank shadow guard inspector, whose courtesy name was Jian, strode into the blood-soaked Chonglong Temple. At this moment, he was not at all the obsequious person he was in front of Lu Chun. Instead, he carried a sinister chill. His expression was gloomy, easily reminding one of a venomous snake lying in wait. He squinted at the 9-story pavilion visible in the distance. His fingers gently stroked the handle of the embroidered spring saber at his waist. As long as they killed all the Taoist priests in Chonglong Temple, then a group of shadow guards would impersonate the temple's Taoist priests to take over the place. Afterwards, it would be exposed that the Taoist priests of Chonglong Temple had been using children's organs as a medicinal ingredient for alchemy. Coincidentally, many families in the Zhongdu city had recently lost their children. Also, a few so-called child-stealing criminals would confess in court that they were instructed by the Taoist priests of Chonglong Temple. Then someone would raise his arm and call out. Stage a scene where the common people surround the Daoist temple. In the end, they naturally really found the bodies of children in the temple. The remaining matters no longer required the shadow guard to push things along. The angry commoners would help them completely erase all traces of the Chonglong Temple, leaving nothing behind. Even if the Daoist sect knew it was wrong, what could they do? Those who killed, those who burned the temple, were not the shadow guard office, but the common people of Zhongdu. As night fell, beneath the ink-blue curtain of darkness, the temple's lights were dimly visible. Layers of dark shadows surged within. An elderly Daoist slowly walked out from the main gate of a 9-story building's first floor, holding a white jade and silver thread fly whisk. With a solemn expression, He was none other than Qingye Daoist, the foremost expert of Chonglong Temple after the old abbot's passing. The old Daoist looked up at the night sky above. No moon, no stars, a scene of dark clouds covering the heavens. The next moment, a dense series of clicking sounds from mechanisms rang out. Nearly 100 crossbow bolts shot toward the old Daoist simultaneously. Green-Leaf Daoist's expression remained unchanged. With just a flick of his sleeve, the countless crossbow bolts were like tired birds returning to the forest, all collected into his sleeve. Then with another flick of his sleeve, the bolts flew back exactly as they came, instantly piercing over a dozen shadow guards who couldn't dodge in time, turning them into hedgehogs. 5 fully armored black-clad soldiers strode out from the darkness. Only their eyes were exposed, like 2 spots of crimson. Holding iron spears in both hands, Green-Leaf Daoist looked at these 5 soldiers, his expression shifting to surprise. He murmured, "Even the inner guard have been dispatched. It seems Lu Chun is truly determined to wipe out my entire Chonglong Temple this time." The so-called inner guards, also known as palace guards, are what the common folk call the imperial elite, the top martial artists at the pinnacle of the dynasty's military force, numbering about 500 in total. Among them were over 21st-rank inner guards, more than 100 second-rank inner guards. The rest were third-rank inner guards. On ordinary days, they were tasked with guarding the emperor and the imperial palace. They were under the command of the Shadow Guard Bureau, but without the emperor's personal edict. Even the 3 commanders of the Shadow Guard Bureau dared not move them lightly. Lu Chun was merely an acting deputy commander, far from qualified to deploy the inner guards. These 5 second-rank inner guards were personally assigned by Commander Fu, one of the triumvirate of the Shadow Guard Bureau, specifically to deal with Daoist Qingye. Daoist Qingye possessed supreme strength. By the standards of the mortal realm, he was at the first-rank realm. However, these 5 second-rank inner guards were no slouches either. Each had reached the second-rank cultivation level and were equipped with talisman inscribed mystic armor impervious to ordinary weapons. Thus, 5 second-rank experts facing a single first-rank expert. The outcome was still uncertain. The 5 armored warriors formed a circular formation. 5 long spears stood like a forest, strode forward toward Daoist Qingye. The old Daoist snorted coldly. He brushed his horsetail whisk in hand. The silver threads on the whisk grew longer in the wind. In an instant, they stretched over 10 zhang long, swept toward the 5 inner guards. The 5 inner guards remained calm and unruffled. The leading inner guard let out a soft shout. The 2 guards on the flanks of the circular formation suddenly sped up. The 2 iron spears in their hands were like 2 rogue dragons. Spear shadows filled the sky, impenetrable as water, blocking the silver threads, filling the sky 3 feet away. The remaining 3 inner guards took the chance to close in on Qingye. The 3 struck out with their spears together. Simple and direct, without any flourish. Clearly a killing technique from the military, tempered by years of combat. At the second-rank realm, it had become nearly flawless. 3 long spears turned into a relentless blur of afterimages, faster than the falling rain, producing sharp, piercing sounds. Even the bluestone paved ground was scored with fine traces by the gale stirred up by the 3 spears. Daoist Qingye, besieged by the trio, constantly shifted his footing. He moved among the spear shadows as if strolling leisurely through a courtyard, dodging the thrusting spears by the narrowest of margins. Meanwhile, his free left hand continuously formed hand seals, attempting to activate the grand formation within the 9-story pavilion behind him. As the saying goes, prolonged defense leads to defeat. Although none of the 5 inner guards matched his cultivation level, relying on their coordinated efforts, steady and persistent, dragging things out to the end, Daoist Qingye would be the first to exhaust his strength. Moreover, he hadn't anticipated the Shadow Guard's actions, failing to activate the formation beforehand. He was forced to take a desperate gamble now. Behind him, golden lamps within the 9-story pavilion lit up one after another. In no time at all, the first floor of the pavilion was already brightly lit. As long as all 10,000 golden lamps on the 9 tiers were lit, the old Taoist priest could defend from here. At the same time, he could send a message to the ancestral temple of the Daoist sect. At this moment, the Dark Art Office had naturally anticipated this and laid their plans. The inspector, who had been observing from afar, reached out his hand. Immediately, an attendant placed a blood-red large bow, as tall as a man, and a pitch-black feather arrow into his hand. He took a deep breath, gripping the large bow with his left hand, steady as a mountain, while his right hand placed the black feather arrow onto the bowstring. Then, the veins on his entire right arm bulged beneath his sleeve as he slowly drew the bowstring taut, like a full moon. The next moment, the black feather arrow silently shot through the air toward the besieged blue-leaf Daoist. This arrow was no ordinary one. Its arrowhead was inlaid with dark iron and refined gold, specially designed to break through an expert's protective chi. The arrow shaft was engraved with talisman inscriptions, and the arrow fletching was made from vulture feathers, fired using the secret technique of the Shadow Guards, reputed to be unstoppable by anyone below the immortal level. Though the Daoist sect does not lack immortals and experts, Greenleaf Daoist was still one step away from the immortal realm. At the critical moment when the Great Formation was about to be activated, this arrow directly broke through Greenleaf Daoist's protective chi, piercing through his chest, shattering his middle Dantian chi palace into pieces. The Great Formation, which had been slowly opening, came to an abrupt halt. Greenleaf Daoist slowly lowered his head. Several shadow guards showed no mercy, nailing Greenleaf Daoist directly to the wall. On the other side, Beiyou could only barely hold on under the assault of that shadow guard expert. At present, Beiyou was at best only around the 6th grade realm, facing a shadow guard expert who was a full 3 grades above him, although he unleashed a formidable combat power comparable to the 4th grade realm. He had only learned a little from the old man carrying his sword. Still, he could not truly threaten this seasoned shadow guard expert, if not for the sword aura that naturally emanated from the Tianlan sword, which would injure anyone who touched it, making the shadow guard cautious. Beiyou and Jiyun would likely have been dead by now, although this shadow guard was not as strong as the inspector or the 5 second-class inner guards. He was still a genuine expert, stuck at the 3rd rank realm for many years, both in killing techniques and combat experience. He was top-notch among his peers. But this time, he encountered Beiyou, an anomaly, and found himself unable to defeat him despite a prolonged assault. Thinking of the deadline set by the inspector, he couldn't help but grow increasingly frustrated. The angrier he became, the faster and more ruthless his attacks grew. If he were fighting an enemy of equal strength, this approach would naturally be inadvisable, as it would easily expose his weaknesses. Unfortunately, Beiyou was far too inferior to this man in terms of fundamental strength. He could see many openings, but couldn't seize them, so his struggle grew harder and harder. Another clang of metal rang out, after Tianlan's blade clashed with the embroidered spring knife. The dark-clad guard suddenly twisted his body, as if his whole frame had become boneless, like a long, supple snake, slipping around Tianlan at an impossible angle, arriving at Beiyou's side. Then he thrust his knife towards Beiyou's ribs. This strike came so suddenly that it surpassed even Beiyou's imagination. He could never have imagined a person could twist their body to such a degree. Though he had tried his utmost to dodge, he still ended up wounded. Witnessing this, Jiyun couldn't help but let out a sharp cry, her face full of panic. Beiyou pressed his hand to his wound, leaning on his sword as he stood, gasping heavily from the searing pain. Speechless, the brocade-clad dark guard did not rush to take Beiyou's life. Instead, he kicked him in the chest, sending Beiyou flying into a corner. He crashed against the wall with a bang, then turned his gaze to Jiyun, who was trembling like a frightened rabbit. His eyes narrowed like a cold-blooded viper ready to strike its prey. He sneered coldly, "Since you're going to die anyway, why not let me enjoy myself before you go? Look at that tempting little mouth of yours. If you don't play a tune for me, it would be a terrible waste." The majestic Zhongdu, a land of 100 battles, was never a place that feared the dead. Countless people had died outside its walls, and just as many had died within them. Every inch of this place had been soaked in blood, and it was precisely this long, dry blood that forged this iron-blooded city standing firm in the northwest. Soft-spoken men had no place here. Neither do gentle, delicate women belong here. Only truly manly people belong here. An old man, bathed in the afterglow of the setting sun, arrived before the city of Zhongdu. He wore a black robe that seemed to be of a southern style. However, after years of wind and sand erosion, the robe had become very old and worn. Its original appearance was indistinguishable. On his back, he carried a large wooden box. It was wrapped in shoe brocade, which was uncommon in the northwest. He looked up at the layered city walls, stacked high. He murmured softly to himself. Old scholar said that Little North tour came to Zhongdu. Speaking of which, I haven't been to Zhongdu for many years myself. Today, I revisit the old place. But in the end, the things remain while the people have changed. The old man stepped forward and walked toward the city gate. The sturdy armored soldiers guarding the gate initially wanted to stop the old man, check the bundle on his back, and skim a little off the top. But upon meeting the old man's gaze, none of them dared to speak. He could only watch helplessly as the old man walked into the city. Only after the old man's figure had faded into the distance did he suddenly realize that his back was drenched in sweat. A gate guard was not exactly a high-ranking figure, but having done the job for so long, he had seen all kinds of people. He had a sharp eye for judging character. In his eyes, the old man carried an air of authority that came only from long-standing power, a pressure that felt even greater than facing his own direct superior. As the saying goes, when the sky falls, the tall ones will hold it up. If this old man truly was someone extraordinary, could he, a mere soldier earning less than half a tael of silver a month, be expected to stop him? The post belonged to the court, but his life belonged to himself. Turn a blind eye, and let it be. After entering the city, the old man walked at an unhurried pace. For some reason, there were very few people on the streets today. In fact, at certain intersections, secret guards in brocade robes carrying blades were patrolling. The old man turned a blind eye to this and strode forward. Several shadow guards tried to stop him, but with a single sweep of his sleeve, they were sent flying like leaves in the wind, crashing heavily to the ground, their fate unknown. As the old man continued onward, more and more shadow guards gathered ahead, yet he still brushed them away with a single sleeve, so that both sides of the path were soon littered with unconscious shadow guards. Finally, the old man arrived at the gate of Chonglong Temple. At that moment, it was the critical juncture of the siege against the Daoist Qingye. Before the old man stood nearly 100 shadow guards, with their crossbows all aimed at him, as if daring him to take another step, ready to riddle him with arrows. The old man smiled, his visage undimmed by age, exuding the demeanor of a true scholar. Even facing 100 shadow guards and crossbows, the old man remained unruffled and said softly, "I'm just looking for someone. I won't delay your business." The leader was a shadow guard inspector. He was also a veteran of the shadow guards, having weathered many storms. Perhaps the other guards hadn't noticed anything unusual, but he felt a bone-chilling nonchalance in the old man's words. Yes, nonchalant like an adult facing a group of noisy children, telling the children to go play elsewhere and not to disturb him. Very casual, and it showed the old man had enough confidence to ignore the nearly 100 crossbows. Could he be a master? The thought crossed the inspector's mind. He raised his hand, not rushing to order the guards to fire. Instead, he said in a deep voice, "Shadow guards on duty. Visitors, please stop or wait for the superior to arrive. We'll settle this then." "But I can't wait," the old man said calmly. His voice was gentle and light, as if catching up with an old friend, showing no sign of the tension of a looming confrontation. The inspector said no more. He simply brought his raised hand down heavily. In an instant, a dense volley of crossbow bolts rained toward the old man. Almost simultaneously, the old man swept his sleeves outward. All the shadow guards felt a strong wind blow against their faces. They had no choice but to squint their eyes. When they reopened their eyes, the old man had vanished without a trace. All that remained were the crossbow bolts scattered messily on the ground. On the other side, that shadow guard with martial prowess above the third rank was about to undo his belt, to enjoy one of the finest pleasures in the world. Su Beiyou leaned against the wall. Tianlan was not far to his right, but he felt as though his spine was about to snap. The slightest movement sent a piercing pain through him. At that moment, Jian's face was drained of all color. She sat on the ground, futilely crawling backward. The shadow guard finally unfastened the tiger head buckle at his waist. His smile had lost some of its coldness, adding a hint of lewdness to it. Young man, where you can spare someone, do so. Killing is merely a matter of bowing one's head in submission. Don't be so despicable. A calm, aged voice suddenly rang out, tinged with a hint of disdain and contempt, as if a private tutor were lecturing. The shadow guard was startled, forgetting the delicate beauty close at hand. He waved his hand and drew the embroidered spring blade back into his grasp, then quickly turned his gaze toward the direction of the voice. He saw an old man carrying a sword case striding into the hall. The shadow guard's pupils suddenly contracted. Years of combat experience told him this uninvited guest was a master, and a formidable one at that, incredibly troublesome. In the martial world, 4 types of people were most taboo: the old, women, monks, and Taoists. Children. Beiyou, half dead, was stunned, clearly not expecting this person to appear here and now. And then a certain soft spot in his heart was touched. Muttering silently, ignoring the pain, he grinned and said, "Master, you've come. The reputation of the Shadow Guard Bureau. I assume you are well aware of it. If you obstruct our official duties, do not blame us for an unending feud in the future." This third-rank Shadow Guard, though he realized the old man was no ordinary person, was not afraid because behind him stood the entire Shadow Guard Bureau. And behind the Bureau was the Emperor, who ruled this splendid land. So what? The old man's expression did not change in the slightest. He said calmly, "The Shao family. Are they so remarkable?" The Shadow Guard was first stunned, then as if he had heard the world's biggest joke. Pointing at the old man, he burst into laughter. Nowadays, even an illiterate old farmer in the countryside knows. The current emperor's surname is Shao. The surname Shao is the imperial surname. This entire realm belongs to the Shao family. So tell me, is that remarkable or not? The old man smiled, recalling some events from many years ago. Then he sighed at the unpredictability of life. The old acquaintance from years past had ascended the throne, while he himself had fallen to a state of drifting without a home. The difference between them could be described as heaven and earth. But no matter how vast that difference, he was not someone to be bullied by a group of unseen shadow guards. The old man said softly, "Whether my disciple is good or bad, it is for me to discipline him. It is not your place to interfere. Since you have interfered, don't blame me for chopping off your paws. Today, the ones I kill are you, the slaves of the Shao family." As his words fell, the next scene left Beiyou and Jiyun utterly stunned. The Shadow Guard who had beaten Beiyou so thoroughly that he couldn't fight back had no time to react. His entire head seemed to be severed by an invisible sword. Then his whole body began to shatter, turning into evenly sized chunks of flesh. And these chunks of flesh continued to break apart as they fell. After it landed completely, it had already become a pool of filthy bloodstains, with no trace of its previous form visible. The old man, without any movement, continued, "Beiyou, didn't Tiyu once ask me what sword chi is? This is it." After dealing with Priest Qingya, the inspector finally realized something was wrong. His trusted subordinate had still not returned. Although this man usually relied on his cultivation and often acted carelessly, he could still prioritize when it came to major matters. Could something have gone wrong? Thinking of this, the inspector dared not be negligent. He led 5 inner guards towards the main hall. But as soon as he reached the entrance of the main hall, he saw this shocking scene. His trusted subordinate had been brutally slashed into a pool of filthy blood by countless strands of sword chi as fine as ox hairs. How capable this subordinate was, he knew best. A genuine peak third-rank cultivator, with extremely rich combat experience. His combat strength was almost comparable to a second-rank master. Even if facing the green leaf Taoist alone, he had some chance of escaping. But such a master actually died just like that. This dark guard inspector narrowed his eyes, looking at the culprit. Then he realized he could not gauge this person's depth. He couldn't help but say, cautiously, "Why, Your Excellency, have you injured someone from my Dark Guard Bureau? If you cannot give me an explanation, I'm afraid I'll have trouble reporting to my superiors." The old man said softly, "Old man kills people. Why need to explain to others? If I want to kill, I kill." The inspector's face changed drastically. The 5 dark guards behind him raised their spears, all pointing at the old man. The old man said calmly. The green blade in my hand seldom drinks blood. Night after night sleepless, often lonely. The inspector could no longer hold back. With a tap of his foot, he swiftly retreated backward. At the same time, the 5 inner guards behind him advanced in unison. 5 iron spears formed an impenetrable forest of steel. The old man gazed at these 5 inner guards and merely raised his hand, then slowly made a horizontal slash before himself. Thus, an invisible sword materialized before the old man, sweeping horizontally toward the 5 inner guards. The sword aura was formless. The sword intent was imageless. This was Sword 11. An imageless sword strike. Perhaps the world had already forgotten what Sword 36 truly was. After all, 60 years is an exceedingly long time. Even though before those 60 years, someone had once made the entire world feel a pain that cut to the bone. Yet after those 60 years, once the scars healed, the pain was forgotten. Even these Shadow Guard inspectors, who had accessed countless archives of secret techniques, could not fully comprehend this. Though he had heard of the illustrious name of Sword 36, he had ultimately never had the chance to witness it with his own eyes. Today, the old man will restore Sword 36 to the world. As for Beiyou's 3 strikes, they are merely superficial. Only those who witnessed it firsthand could grasp how terrifying the old man's strike truly was. It simply disregarded the layered obstruction of the 5 iron spears, then pierced through the dark armor impervious to blades and spears, and struck directly upon the 5 inner guards. In the next instant, the entire upper bodies of the 5 inner guards, each of 2nd rank cultivation, flew off, while their lower bodies remained standing on the ground in lunge stance. The iron spears in their hands and the dark armor on their bodies bore not a single scratch, yet they themselves had been cleaved in 2.